Are you ready for some football? I want to tell you the story now about the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers, the 1974 NFL Draft, and some other random items as we go along. It was highly believed that the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers are the best team they ever assembled, and the best team of that era. And they had high expectations for that season. But they started off really bad, and they couldn't figure out why, but they ended up being 1-4 after the first 5 games. And Terry Bradshaw got hurt for the season. My man. So they turned to a rookie quarterback, Mike Krujak. Some of you older Pittsburgh fans will remember him. We used to joke around because Bradshaw was a real tough guy. And I remember one game, Jim Haslett, Terry Bradshaw's helmet came off, and Jim Haslett kicked him in the head, and his head was bleeding. His bald head was bleeding, and Jim Haslett just kicked him there. He played linebacker for the Bills at the time, and Bradshaw, running into the locker room. Krujak would come in, hand off for 3 times to Franco. They'd punt, and then the next series, Bradshaw would be right back. And if Bradshaw went down in the first half, he almost always came back in the second half. He was a tough quarterback. So this season, he went down for the season, and they turned to Mike Krujak, and they turned to the Steelers' defense. The Steel Curtain, and this might have been the best defense of all time, the 76 team. Let me tell you why. First of all, we had Jack Lambert, Mean Joe Green, Glenn Edwards, hard hitter, Dwight White, Jack Ham, Steve Furness, Ernie Fats Holmes. This guy used to shave his head into an arrow. He was once chased by the Ohio Police Department in a helicopter on the Ohio Turnpike and ended up shooting at the helicopter. The Rooneys got him off with a $5,000 fine, but he was a beast. L.C. Greenwood, Mel Blunt. They named a rule after him to protect teams against him. And Andy Russell. And these defenders did something insane. So Chuck Noll turned to Krujak and the Steel Curtain defense and Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris, and they said, we're going to stop everybody. So what did they do? They handed off to Franco and Rocky. And as you can see on these 1977 cards, the season before, they were each a 1,000-yard rusher. That doesn't happen too often, probably never happen again. And the Steel Curtain defense, you know what they did? For the next 9 games, they gave up a total of 28 points, including 5 shutouts. And the Steelers went to the playoffs. And Mike Krujak set the rookie record for most consecutive wins by a rookie quarterback. And do you know who broke it? Big Ben. So they go to the playoffs. They destroy the Colts in the playoffs. But both Rocky and Franco get hurt. And as you probably know, back then it was more of a running game. Jack Lambert insists, had they not gotten hurt, they would have went to the Super Bowl. But the Oakland Raiders, who had a great team back then, beat them in the championship game. And that's the story of the 1976 Pittsburgh Steelers and their phenomenal defensive stats that year. Now, something else I wanted to talk to you about was the 1974 draft, which is widely considered the best draft ever, or possibly one of the best drafts ever, and definitely the best draft for a single team. And in that draft, the Steelers drafted, number 1, Lynn Swann. This draft produced 5 Hall of Famers, and only one of them was not a Pittsburgh Steeler. So Lynn Swann, they took Jack Lambert. Jack Lambert was considered to be too slow, too undersized to ever play linebacker in the pros. He went to Kent State, and Art Rooney Jr. and another guy were down at the practice facility, scouting some players, and they saw this guy tackling people in a parking lot, and they came back and talked them into drafting him. This was the guy that Chuck Noll wanted the most, but Lynn Swann was like the top receiver coming out of college, and it was pretty known that the Cowboys would draft him, who were drafting right after the Steelers if the Steelers didn't. So they went with Lynn Swann first, and the other coaches talked Chuck Noll into holding off on John Stallworth because no one ever heard of John Stallworth. He went to a small little school down south. And so he was drafted, he was the 4th draft pick. It was in the 5th round because they didn't have a 4th round pick or something like that. And so John Stallworth was another one. And Mike Webster, he was their 3rd pick in that draft. The other Hall of Famer out of that draft was tight end Dave Casper. And you might remember Dave Casper because they changed the rule for him too. He had kicked the ball, he fumbled it, kicked it in the end zone, and jumped on it for a touchdown. And that's when they changed the rule that you could not advance your own fumble. So there's some history for you. Other notables in that draft were Ed Too Tall Jones, who many argue should be in the Hall of Fame. He actually retired in the prime of his career and started a boxing career. He did that for a short stint and then went back to Dallas and became their all-time leader in consecutive games played. He was a beast. And another player in that draft was Roger Carr, who was a very good wide receiver for the Colts. So that's the 74 draft. You know, the Steelers had a long history of drafting, draft busts with quarterbacks or screwing things up until they got Bradshaw. Some interesting points. They drafted Johnny Unitas in the 12th round and cut him. They drafted Len Dawson. He played for them for like 2 years. They didn't like him. He wasn't working out. They traded him to the Browns. The Browns then traded him. They brought in Bobby Lane, and that's when Len Dawson knew it was over for him. And as all the good defense and all the great players and Hall of Famers that have come out of Pittsburgh, do you know that they had only ever retired one number in their history? And that was Ernie Stotner. Until recently, when they finally retired Joe Green's number, because they consider Joe Green the greatest Steeler of all time, because he changed our whole defense. They built the whole entire defense around him, and he invented the gap defense. Many people don't know this, but Joe Green had a bum arm for the second half of his career, and he could barely lift it. And he was willing to take that gap. He found a way to exploit that. If he took that, other players could make plays. And there was you might see this on a video. There was a time where Lynn Swann got hurt, and he went out to try to pick him up, and he couldn't lift him. You could just see that arm just fall. But Joe Green was a beast. So those are the only 2 guys the Pittsburgh Steelers ever retired their numbers. So that's my story. Thanks for watching.